Hello everyone, my name is Dipanjan Ghosh. I'm a cloud solution architect, and I also do a little bit of evangelism around Azure, development, architectures, hybrid, and integration as well. You have seen me quite a bit in ANZ, in different community events. I have done some community events in Hong Kong as well. Today, I'm really excited to talk about modernizing and moving applications, web applications, to Azure, to cloud. And it's very important because it is most sought after nowadays. And also, we are going to learn, before even moving, we are going to learn why we want to move to cloud and what are those gears, what are those necessities that is pushing us to move our applications and our environments to cloud. So hopefully you guys are going to learn a lot, and that would make your path a little less bumpy when you're moving to cloud. So let's get into the presentation. All right. Welcome again to Migrating Web Applications to Azure. And here are some of the links for my for if you guys want to contact me later and talk about some of the topics that we talked today, as well as anything else that you want to learn or discuss about Azure. Now let's quickly get into the agenda. You would, of course, see that we're going to talk about introduction to modernization path. Now, this is really important and exciting learning path because we are going to talk about how we can migrate VMs to on-premises to Azure. But not just that, we are going to also talk about some of the newer technologies, databases. We are going to talk about containers and so on and so forth that modernizes applications quite a bit. But of course, for this particular one, we are going to, of course, look at transformation and how we modernize applications. Now, of course, before we even get to modernization, we need to understand what are the reasons for transformation. We really want to transform and do things we have been doing for last hundreds of years. We have been running things on premises and it runs fine. Why do we really need to move forward? Also, if we do it and we know that it's important, what are the tactics? What are the approaches to actually modernize and migrate applications to cloud? And then I'm going to show you guys some skills, some important aspects of how to move the web application to Azure. Of course, this would help you guys, developers, IT engineers, just to make your life a bit more easy, less bumpy to the journey to cloud. Now, as we move forward, you would say that you hear this word called disruption quite a bit. What is it? It's a break or interruption in the normal course or continuation of some activity or process. Now, you would see surprisingly that this disruption is being heard and being told in a lot of cases where we talk about technology and so on and so forth. So on this regard, I'm going to quickly talk about a story which would re-emphasize why disruption is there and why it is so important that we notice it. All right, so on a snowy Christmas Eve in 2007, Garrett Camp was in Paris, France. He was looking for a ride to a party, but not just any ride. He was looking for something special, something that would fit the occasion. Now, this is probably a very special occasion that he was going to, and he, of course, wanted to go in a bit, go in with a bit of suave, and he wanted to go in a nice car, which is fine. Now, of course, he wanted a high-end car, something with leather seats, something clean, and of course, something which is not color yellow, which means that he, of course, didn't want to go in a taxi, right? So he ordered a private car, and boy, it cost him $800. Just one ride in one car. That's one expensive ride, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure you guys have hired cars before, but that was really expensive. And that let Garrett think that, hey, this is crazy. Why is a good ride so hard to afford? Why not help people, who can get a ride like this and not break the bank? Why can't we affordably, get a ride which is nice and expensive and get connected to those drivers? So he had an idea. Why not make a nice cab ride available to anyone? anywhere. Doesn't matter where you are, you should be able to get connected to a driver who is willing to drive you around, right? So then he started figuring how to do it. What are the easier way to do that? How to connect those drivers to the riders? And then he realized that should be easy. Of course, in the era of smartphones and apps, there are already millions of ways of connecting the riders straight back to the drivers. And I think you guys already understand where I'm going with this, right? And you probably already know where the story ends. I'm talking about the rideshare services. I'm talking about Uber, Lyft, Grab, and you name it. In the so in the next 12 years, Uber would completely upend the traditional taxi business, would be creating millions of new jobs, billions in revenue, and practically jump-starting a whole new economy. And the cab companies, they hadn't seen what's coming at them. They couldn't move quickly, and that was a massive, massive disruption to the taxi services. And that's what we call disruptions. Now, a lot of companies are actually now getting up and looking at it because they never know what kind of next revolution or what kind of Uber that kind of comes to their business and massively disrupt them or take them out of business. So that's where we need to move quickly, leverage technology, and use cloud to do it. And that's when we come to something which also you would hear a lot, which is called as digital transformation. Now, the use of new, fast, and frequently changing digital technology to solve problems, often utilizing cloud computing, reducing reliance on user-owned hardware, but increasing reliance on subscription-based cloud services. Now, um, you would see here that the cloud computing is probably the secret sauce or the main pillar that actually holds the digital transformation. That's why it is so important. And we have to also understand that when we speak about digital transformation or moving to cloud, not all we are not just talking about the applications that going to be created tomorrow or the applications that we are going to build in the future. We're also going to talk about the applications that's being spinning up now. That's our workhorse, which is running on premises at the moment. And if we still keep running that on premises, then you know what? Um, our limit, we are significantly limited to how fast we can move because we are still stuck to those applications. So today, especially today, we are going to learn how to move those existing applications and get them to cloud. Now, of course, why do we need to modernize? And of course, digital transformation is one thing that we talked about. But then, of course, remember that we also need to reduce cost. So tomorrow, if a Uber-like company shows up, I wouldn't be thinking of, how do I do all this transformation? Would I get out of business? Do I have that enough money to transform and compete? So of course, we need to reduce cost while thinking of those things. And as we do that, of course, we need to look at how do we reduce our overhead? How can we manage our operations and reduce it as we go? That's where, again, cloud comes in, where most of those operations, the traditional operations of maintenance and so on, is actually taken care of or moves to be the cloud's responsibility. At least in Azure's case, that's how it is. So your managed services takes care of most of those operations and make you more lightweight. And then, of course, as we move forward, as my business grows in demands and shrinks in terms of network, I should be able to do that as well. I shouldn't have to buy huge amount of hardware and keep it such that it is only being catered for worst case scenario. I should be able to expand and shrink as my requirements are. So that's where elastic scales come in, and that's where cloud is a tick. And then, of course, we have to remember that for any skills or any company, it is as good as the people. So to keep the people on the toes, to keep the people excited, we need to provide them with the latest skills. We need to provide them with the right tools to use and scale up so that they can also be excited to work and deliver. So now obviously the modernization is good. The cloud seems to be the clear and obvious win. Why don't we do it? Now, One thing we have to be really careful about is when we talk about migration of apps. In fact, when we talk about moving infrastructure, etc., to cloud, that's no cakewalk. Anyone who tells you otherwise, it's not being honest about it. But don't worry, this phenomena is going on for a while, over 10 years, I would say, and there are a lot of companies who have already migrated. There are a lot of companies who are going through digital transformation at the moment, and we have tons of experience working with those companies, working with different scenarios, and doing the actual work. So we should be able to give you guys those tips and tricks, and some of that I'm going to show you today to move those customers and use the right tools to move to cloud. And as I said, of course, migration is tough, period. They're not easy. And I'm sure, in every company, I've seen this in my experience, that there are applications that nobody touches and everyone prays that never breaks because nobody knows how to fix those. And those are essential applications as well, and they are sitting in on premises. So what do we do with those kind of apps which are on premises, and how do we move them? So let's now look at the migrating and modernization strategies. So there are a few ways of approaching those applications. Number one is, of course, rebuild. Frankly, if you ask me if I have the time and money, this is the perfect way of doing it. I would completely rewrite that application, use the latest and greatest modern native tools of cloud, and I would be, things like logic apps, serverless products like um, function apps, and so on, or even Kubernetes to build native um, cloud applications that would be amazing. So that's number one. Number two would be refactoring. Now this is also a lot of people use that. Now refactoring is obviously not writing the overhauling the whole application. It is repackaging the application, maybe changing a few things. No major code change, but smaller aspects of it. Maybe I'm going to change the connection strings. Maybe I'm going to look at the storage instead of a shared drive and things like that. And a lot of companies are doing that as well. And then, of course, there are something called re-architecting. Now, this is also a bit of a work where you practically modernize your code. Of course, with the modern application and moving to cloud, you might start using automation, you might start using DevOps, you might break your monolith applications to microservices and so on. Again, it would need a bit more resources and time to do these kind of mechanisms. However, there's another one which is called lift and shift. You probably have heard this term quite a bit as well. And I call this the path of least resistance. And frankly, this is fantastic because a successful lift and shift migration takes advantage of the infrastructure benefits and management features of the cloud while minimizing both the migration cost and decrease the time required to complete the migration, which is amazing, right? Because I do not have the time to overhaul or rewrite all my applications. There are too many. So why can't I just use or try to use like for like virtualized infrastructure in cloud, and then try to use my tried and tested scripts, the same operations and process that I've been using, and then just move it to cloud? How cool would that be? So we are going to look at some of those aspects today, especially. And while I'm making the move, what are the different things that I need to look out for? Of course, to start with, as we are moving towards infrastructure or VMs, we have to assess the new virtualized needs. Now, when we move from on-premises, on-premises is a bit more physical. You have racks and servers and cabling and so on and so forth, and your storage racks as well. In cloud, everything is virtualized. You frankly can spin up resources just by click of a button. So of course, you need to understand what are your virtualized needs, what kind of VNets you need, what kind of VMs. And again, there are a huge amount of options, so it's easy for you to choose the right one. And of course, you're getting it firewall and so on and so forth. The next would be the plan and method to copy the application. Now, of course, do I need to do a massive hard drive copy? Do I do DevOps a little bit? And not just about copying the applications, right? You have to plan a bunch of things like the cutover periods, the databases, and how they are going to move. How the new application in cloud is going to connect to my databases, how the database is going to get lifted and shifted, and also things like DNS entry and so on and so forth. So I would frankly suggest having a nice checklist which would go through each one of it, and then as you go through each process, you can have a tick and know what you are doing. And last but not the least, we call flip the switch. Now, when we say flip the switch, what does it mean? It means that I'm now comfortable and ready to have the application start running in the cloud. And when we do flip the switch, a lot of companies have different meaning to it. Some company does 10% run starts 10% in cloud, and the rest in Azure. Some company or on premises, some company does 50-50, or some company just totally, of course, get rid of the data center, or get rid of the application on premises, and then start fully working from cloud. So it depends on what your processing and what your comfort is. Now, as we move for this kind of lift and shift, because we are moving towards VM, let's emphasize on something. And again, I think you guys have heard quite a bit of these things in last few years. This is called infrastructure service, or IaaS. Now, this is basically replacing your data center, your physical hardware, with your virtualized components like CPU, memory, network, but everything is virtualized, right? So for example, you would be having a huge amount of um, virtual servers that you can use, again, depending on what kind of load you want to put in, and you would, on a click of a button, can have huge amount of storage as well. Same with network firewalls and security as well. So again, everything is virtualized. They are all virtual appliances, and you can, of course, have networking firewall rules, security, applications, DNS entries, and so on and so forth. Last but not the least, and this is also very, very important, because when we talk about, say, a bank or a retailer or something like that, you are not really in a business of running a huge data center. You don't want to really build racks, because that's not your core business. You don't really want to um, you know, fill up generators, because yesterday there was a problem. So you want to get out of those kind of situation and concentrate on the logic and your own core business. So that's where cloud helps quite a bit, because again, you do not have to maintain those things, those hardware, those physical infrastructure, and of course also for those kind of things you have to then goes through policies and regulations and government regulations and certifications as well. And you don't have to do that, because we take care of that as well. Now, you might come back and tell me that, hey, by the way, I have a need of huge amount of VMs, huge amount of cores, and I really need a big rig. And if you ask me that, I would say we have answers for it, because if you want to, we currently provide virtual machines featuring over 128 vCPUs, 6 terabytes of memory. It can get up to 3.7 million local storage IOPS per VM, which is amazing. You can take advantage of up to 30 Gbps Ethernet and up to 100 Gbps InfiniBand networks. Frankly, you can run massive infrastructure core, etc. on cloud. And of course, it is not just about running a machine, it's also about reliability. It's also about resiliency, redundancy, and so on. And of course, in Azure, we take care of that. So in terms of course, things like Azure availability set, availability zones, and scale sets, you can deploy in such a way that those are reliable. Of course, you can put AI and automation in place where it can scale automatically, or can understand from the insights itself, and it can say, for example, if you have 4 servers and one broke, you can automatically spin that up. Simplified networking, as we said before, they are not physical at all. It is all part of a click, and automatically you get, let's say, um, um, uh, get a load balancer. You can get something like application insights, monitoring, and so on and so forth. Also, if you look at hyperscale workloads, we talk about things like Kubernetes, we talk about Azure Batch, etc., which can simply spin up to hundreds and thousands of cores and do your compute for you. Now, all this is well and good, but how much do I pay for it? And which is a very pertinent and important question. And that's where I'm going to show you the screen. And frankly, you can Bing or Google Azure Compute or Azure Calculator, and that's where you can go and actually calculate all the resources that you want to spin up and see how much it costs. For example, in this case, it's a virtual machine, as you can see, and the region is West US. You can see the operating system, and of course, you see that the instance is a D2 machine, and which is 2 core and 8 GB RAM, and it costs you certain amount of money. And also, if you see at the bottom, there is the option as pay as you go, which is quite good for dev and test and such kind of workload where you spin up and then tomorrow if you don't want to spin up, you just shut down and you don't pay anymore. And then of course for a bit more permanent or a bit more resilient workloads, say for example production and so on, you can actually look at the reserved instances where you of course get a bit more discount. So frankly, what it says is there's no surprise. You can of course before even spinning up things, you can look at how much it can potentially cost you. And of course, getting to towards the demo, what we are trying to drive here is that you don't have to go to a basement and look at the racks and stacks. It would be more point and click. It would be more dashboards where you can see things as it is. And of course, you can see there is the portal, and that's where you can see your resources and spin up new resources. And of course, you can use bash scripts where you can write resources and use stuff as well. Now, hold on a minute. I'm getting a big news. And this is, of course, part of our use case today. The daily news that I read quite often is the world's most newspaper. You see that Tailwind Traders is acquiring Northwind. Now, I'm pretty sure you must have heard of Northwind. Most of you have heard of Northwind before. It's one of the biggest fake companies that Microsoft have created to do this kind of scenarios. And it's a big news. But frankly, in terms of acquisitions in real life, we have seen big companies acquiring the other company, and of course, it's a lot of money and shares and so on. But also, what it does, it inherits a huge amount of technical debt because with those big companies, you might be coming with some ugly data centers, apps which you have no idea of how it's been holding up together, and so on and so forth. So that gives us a very nice segue to get into this particular application called Tailwind Traders app. And as you can see, it's an e-commerce website, but it's a very important website because it's not only just get the users to go and buy things, but it also connects with the backend. Of course, where you can get your mobile app, as well as it connects to your customers and as well as your inventory as well. Now, this has been running in an on-premises situation, but let's see if we can move it to cloud. Now, as we go ahead, let's go a bit deep into what kind of technology it's been built with. So as you can see, it's an open source application, a bit old. As you can see, it's .NET Core App 2.1, and it's open source. Now let's see what else it does. Of course, it has a backend. It has fairly a big amount of backend. It has MongoDB as a database. And of course, it has a RDBMS as well in terms of MS SQL. So of course, we need to take care of those things as we move to cloud. Now, not just the backend and the application, there is the front end as well, surely. And that, as you can see, is with React.js, one of the more popular ones nowadays. Again, it's open source JavaScript, and most of those installations would be, of course, done with NPM. So as you can see, there are a lot of tools that's already been employed. And this is an old application that is running on premises. And how do we deploy this whole application every day, day to day on premises at the moment? Of course, with our trusted bash deployment script. Now, back in the day when there were not much automation and not much cloud around, we had something called deploy.sh or bash scripts or scripts that frankly we would write those scripts to assimilate all the applications or all the tasks that we need to do and automate them. So very same way on premises at the moment, the company has this bash script, and let's see if we can use the same bash script to run and deploy it in the cloud itself without changing anything. Of course, now let's start moving. So what are we going to move? So today, of course, I'm going to show you how to spin up of Azure VM. Of course, I'll give you a glimpse of Azure SQL DB, Azure Cosmos DB as well. These are databases as a service. Now, I would absolutely encourage you guys to look at some of the other sessions which talks about moving databases to Azure, and you would find a lot more around the database side of things. Do go and check those out. And of course, we would see that as we spin VMs, we would be spinning up network and storage as well, and some of the network appliances. Now, as we get into the demo, you would see that I would be using the Azure portal, and I would be using the Cloud Shell as well. So everything already in cloud and everything already readily available. So let's now move and do some demos. All right, as we look into my screen here, I have the portal already, and I have the, I'll just switch this off so that I can show that again. So this is the portal, and you can use shell script directly from here, where you can spin it up, as you can see right now, or you can frankly go shell.azure.com, and you can load the shell directly on the browser itself. So you can go both ways. I'm going to do it here for now because it's just easy and I can quickly see it. And as we start creating the application and migrating things, I'm just going to point to that I've already created or pre-created the resource group and the applications itself here, so that as we created just for the just because we are tight in time, we are going to come back and keep looking at how it is once it's created. All right. So let's start creating the application. And what we are going to do is we are going to start with creating a group. Now we call it a group in Bash scripts, but in real life we call it, or in Azure we call it resource group. Now, as we start doing that, you would see that in the shell you can use PowerShell or Bash. It depends on what you're comfortable with. But for today, I'm going to use Bash. Now let's create the group, and as you can see, it's AZ group create, and I'm putting this as the name, and I'm putting the location and as Australia Southeast. Now, as we create this, you would see that it's quite fast, and the infrastructure gets created very, very quickly. The other thing, okay, so there you go, it's already created. Now, as we created the group, we can see that the location is Australia Southeast. Now, this the resource group might be in Australia Southeast, that's fine, but the underlying resources can be from any other location that you like. Think of this as more of a container for all your resources. So for example, if I go back and look at this particular resource group, you would see that think of resource group as a container of all your resources. For example, if you are, say if it's a dev and test scenario and tomorrow you want to delete the whole resource group, you can delete the whole resource group and all the resources would go with it as well. So that's an amazing way of kind of controlling and managing the resource. So of course, once that resource group is created, let's start putting some resources inside. If I actually go back and look at my resource groups and do a refresh, I would see the new resource group pop up as well. Here you go. All right, let's get back to my bash script. Now, once we create, start creating a VM where I can deploy my web application. Now for that, first of all, what I need to do is create a VNet. Now let's go and look at how we can do that. All right, so as you can see, I'll quickly go through the command. I say AZ network VNet create. I give a name to the VNet. Of course, I'm pointing to the same resource group that that I've just created, and voila, the VNet is already created. And again, you would see, now let's go back and check that out. I go back here, and I just do a refresh. Sometimes it takes a bit of time to for the resource to show up. And let's not wait. Let's go back and actually look at the VM, the VNet from before. And as we do it, reduce this. If you look at this particular VM, you would see that this VNet, there is the address space which is already created, and I have also created one subnet as the command says, which is called default. Now, in an ideal scenario, you might be creating a bit more subnets, maybe a front end or a back end subnet, maybe a utility subnet. But for my demo purposes, I've just created one where all my stuff is going to get put. Anyway, let's get back to the demo. Now, once I've created my VNet, I'm good to go. Now let's go ahead and create my VM. Now I would obviously run this command and start creating this, but I would also show you how to create this through portals, because you might not be familiar with some of the scripts, or you might want to just spin up a VM and check how it goes. So as you can see, I'm pointing to the same resource group. I have named my VM right here. I've put a public IP because obviously I want to go to internet with a website. And this particular case, I'm just going to use a Ubuntu image, Ubuntu LTS, and I've provided the username and so on and so forth. And of course, the size, I'm just using a standard DS 3v2 machine. So let's start spinning this up. But as we do it, let's go back and check how the VM actually looks. So if you actually go in and look at this, you would see that this is one of the old VMs that's created. It got a public IP, and of course it has a private IP because it is sitting on that particular VNet. But as we go, let's go back and try spinning one up through Portal, or at least look at it how it looks. Now, as you can see, there are a lot of popular VM images that's readily available in the marketplace. In fact, there's hundreds of them. You can have a look. So if I spin up Ubuntu VM, as you can see, this is the subscription. Now, subscription is basically a billing unit. So it depends on which billing unit, under which billing unit you want to spin up your VM. You can see that it's already chose the resource group. Let's call my VM TWT wave 1. And as I said before, we have at the moment around 54 regions, and you can frankly pick the ones that your company is comfortable with. For my case, I'm just using Australia Southeast. Now, as I said, once the VM is created, it's not enough. It's not alone. Enough. You need to also look at scale sets, availability sets, and if the region supports availability zones, then look at those, because that would give you extra resiliency and high availability as well. So once you choose that, of course, you get the right image. As you can see, there's plenty of images here, and in fact, there are a lot more if you look at the Azure Marketplace. Size is very important. In this case, of course, we have chosen this, but let me give you a glimpse of how it is, how it actually looks. Let me clear the filter. And now if you see here, there is heaps and heaps of VMs out here and available. Now, you might think, why are there so many VMs? Now, each VM or each type of VMs are cut out for different kind of load. Of course, if you are looking for high GPU, if you are looking for a high CPU, and so on and so forth, you would be using, say a N series or a F series or H series, or if you are looking for general production load, you would be looking at D series. If you're looking for high memory like SAP HANA, then you would look at M series and stuff like that. So those, there are different VMs for different capabilities. And of course, I'm going to back to the D series machine. You can, I would be choosing SSH. Of course, you can go for password as well. I would be, of course, allowing a bit of public ports because I want to SSH in. Disk is very important because it tells you how fast you want to run your system. So of course we have the standard HDD and then the standard solid state drives. And then of course we have premium SSD as well, which is really, really cool. Has a lot more IOPS. We have things like Ultra SSD as well, which are cut out for special kind of VMs. In this case, of course, this particular VM doesn't need Ultra disk, but if you need to, then it's available. And of course, you can keep adding more disks to it depending on your needs. Of course, for my need, I do not need one. And then quickly brushing through the network, of course, it needs to sit on a VNet. It chose the right one, and then it chose the default subnet. There's just one. We of course will create a public IP because we want to get out to the internet. Accelerated networking again is used for VMs which need to be super fast and need to talk to another, say a VM or another database, etc. In a very fast manner. You can actually enable accelerate networking. For me, at this point, I do not need one. Of course, the same goes for load balancing because it's just one machine. And of course, one thing good about Azure is that that you do not really need to get into the machine to understand what's going on. You can really go into things like Azure Security Center, which would give you a lot of information about how it's working. Of course, you can just switch out in the monitoring just like that. As you spin up the VM, you can look at identity and things like key vaults that would keep your secrets. If you want to do domain joining of machines, you can directly do it through Azure Active Directory. Again, one of the very important aspects of moving to cloud, your identity. And then you can do some automations like auto shutdown. Like if it's a normal work machine, or if it's dev and test and you want to switch it off in the off hours, you can enable auto shutdown. And of course, if it's an important application, you absolutely need to do backup, right? Because without backup, you might not have a business if something goes wrong. So you do that and hit on create. But as you can see, if I come back here, my VM is already created, which is amazing. Now, once that VM is created, it is as good as the ones that I already have on premises. So there's not much of a surprise. And frankly, I've been using the same commands, and I would be using the same commands to play with it. Now, of course, I need to enable some of the ports. So of course, I'm going to enable port 80. Excuse me. And because of course I'm going to go to the internet, I'm going to enable port 80, port 443, and of course for SSH, I'm going to enable port 22 as well. So that's port 443, and finally I'm going to enable the port 22 as well. Let's see. Awesome. All right, so once that's done, all I would do is log into the machine, and then I would just run the deploy.sh scripts. Now let me, as it happens, I'll just quickly show you the deploy.sh script. It is something that's been tried and tested. It's been running in my own premises for a long time. It absolutely works. And as you can see in cloud, I'm just going to exactly run the same deploy.sh, which goes and from the repository gets my application, deploys it into a machine. It of course gets all the packages through .NET and npm. It gets some more variables, and finally publishes my application. And at the end, of course, Nginx comes in and does its setting as well. So it's a tried and tested script, which I would run. But before that, of course, I need to SSH into the machine. Let's go and do that. All right. So when it starts off, absolutely, I want to SSH into the machine, and as you can see how easy it is to right from creating an infrastructure to a VM and then getting into a VM in just few minutes. How good is that? From zero presence in cloud to spinning up and creating applications. So once I'm in, all I do is get my script. So here's what I'm doing that at the moment. And here you go. And there you go. So it's now deploying the script. And once the script is deployed, I would, which is already here, what I'll do is I would just run command, which would just go ahead and deploy it. Before that, of course, the script needs some of the parameters, which I'm going to quickly pass. So here it goes. As you can see, I'm already logged into the Linux machine that's already there. As you can see, I'm passing some of the commands, some of the connection strings that it needs to run the scripts. And I'm going to pass the other one as well. Just give me a second. Probably. All right. And then I would just do that. And there you go. And now all I do is run my script and deploy, which I've been doing all my life in on-premises. Bang. So as we go at just like any other scripts, it would go ahead and deploy it. But all I'm going to tell you is now that I would go back once the script is run. I would go to the application and bang, the application is now right from on premises within few minutes. It's all running up and running from cloud, and it's obviously in production grade with all the data and so on. You can of course log in as a admin and so on. So that's where I would finish my demo, but I want to quickly go back to my presentation and talk about a few more things before we get to the closure. Now, you might tell me that, what if I do not want to use VMs? What if I want to use a bit more native features like PaaS and so on? I would say absolutely. But for that, I would also recommend things like Azure Migration Services. Now, these are free online tools. You can actually use this kind of tools to go ahead and do assessment on your on-premises, on your infrastructure, and see if it's actually ready, or if your VMs are ready to move, your applications are ready to move, and if it's ready to move, what are the best tools that the cloud offers or Azure offers to move those applications? For example, I talk about Azure App Services. Now, this is one of the perfect tools, a perfect platform, frankly, if you ask me, to move some of these applications. In fact, the one that I showed right now, it would have been a very good candidate for moving to app services. Again, it supports Python, Node, PHP, containers, and so on, and of course .NET as well. And you don't have to worry about apps, VMs. You don't have to worry about maintaining it, patching it. You just deploy your application through CI/CD or even FTP, and it supports custom domains, SSL. Again, load balancing, as well as scale out and scale in, and frankly, you are already done. So look at some of those features, of course, managed databases and so on, to really look at some of the PaaS services. Really, really important. And as we get towards the closure, these are some of the things that I would absolutely want you guys to have a look at. Look at some of the learning collections. There is a huge amount of information in MSDN. Have a search and look for the things that you like. Hopefully, you've got a lot of ideas and information that you can pick and look for in MSDN. And finally, when you think that you are ready, definitely go ahead and do some certifications. As we go toward the closure, I just wanted to quickly say thank you, and also remind you guys about some of the good things that we learned today, some of the tips and tricks of moving or migrating to Azure, and of course the reasons why we want to do that. And I would encourage you guys to look at some of the other sessions and get some of those nice, bright ideas, and hopefully you guys can try something fun and cool in Azure. Thank you.